Hello, everyone. I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and happy Canadian Film Day. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional Indigenous lands that we all live and gather on today. Although this event is online and takes place at many locations across Canada, we each enjoy the privilege of living and working within an Indigenous territory. As a gesture of appreciation for our use of these lands, I would ask that you join me in acknowledging the people who have lived and thrived in these regions across the continent for tens of thousands of years. DGC Visionaries 2021 is where we celebrate DGC filmmakers' work at all the major film festivals across Canada. This week is dedicated to Hot Docs in Toronto and Doxa in Vancouver. We're extremely fortunate to have award-winning filmmaker Shane Belcourt as our moderator tonight. Shane is an award-winning and two-time CSA-nominated filmmaker. As a writer and director on many Indigenous works, in both narrative and factual, Shane has a vested interest in creating works that speak to his Métis heritage. Notable work includes the feature film Togoronto, the dance documentary Kahawi, The Cycle of Life, which was the 2015 CSA Best Direction nominee, and two historical Canadian minutes, Chani Wenjack and Nasku Mituin Treaty. Recent works include the award-winning 2018 CBC first-hand documentary Indictment, which was co-directed with Lisa Jackson and won the Imaginative Best Documentary Award, and the music documentary series Amplify for APTN, where Shane was the series creator, executive producer, and showrunner. And the dramatic feature, Red Rover, Shane was the co-writer and director, and he's also an alumna of the TIFF Talent Lab and NSI's Totally Television programs. Our featured director tonight is award-winning director ELLE-MÁIJÁ TAILFEATHERS, whose new film, Kima Pio Pitsini, The Meaning of Empathy, is premiering at Hot Docs and Doxa. She's a writer, director, producer, and actor. She is a member of the Kainai First Nation, as well as the Sami from Norway. She was named the 2018 Sundance Film Institute's Murata Mita Film Fellow and is an alumnus of the Berlinale Talent Lab and the Hot Docs Accelerator Lab. Her short documentary, Vitos, was selected as one of TIFF's top 10 Canadian shorts and also won the Grand Jury Prize for Best Documentary Short at the Seattle International Film Festival. She acted in and co-wrote and co-directed with DGC director Kathleen Hepburn the brilliant narrative feature, The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, which premiered at the Berlinale in 2019 and received the Toronto Film Critics Association and Vancouver Film Critics Circle Awards for Best Canadian Film. It was also nominated for 6 Canadian Screen Awards, and she and Hepburn won the CSAs for Best Direction and Best Original Screenplay. The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open was picked up for distribution by Ava DuVernay's company Array and is available to stream on Netflix in the United States. Amazing work from two amazing filmmakers that we've got for you tonight. Before we welcome them in, I'd like to share the trailer to ELLE-MÁIJÁ's new film with you. Ryan, if you would, please. We'll try it again.
This is home, Ghana, otherwise known as Kainai, or the Blood Reserve. Nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, Kainai is the largest reserve in Canada. Beginning in 2014, fentanyl flooded the illicit drug trade on the reserve. This new reality has forced our community to approach addiction in radically different ways.
The difficulty was in convincing people that harm reduction is the route that we have to take.
By no means is it celebrating addiction, but what it does is it celebrates the lives of people without judgment.
Our group here is looking at expanding what we have to do to help our community heal.
There you go. Now you could save a life.
It's very heart-wrenching when you go on a call and people are breathless.
And we can't sit back and expect things to change without doing the work.
Progress notes.
Trying to get off these ox-80s by yourself, it's hard.
The next thing we want to do is address a detox facility on reserve.
History marks the Bloods as some of the fiercest, strongest people there ever was. And I want us to get to that point again.
I'm happy.
We have a Blackfoot word that's called Gimmapi Bitsin, which means giving kindness to each other.
Thank you.
And that means also compassion for those who are suffering.
It's an amazing thing that they've done. And in my eyes, they're heroes.
Fantastic and important film. I'd like to welcome ELLE-MÁIJÁ TAILFEATHERS and Shane Belcourt. Come on in, guys. A little bit of the live thing. We have to have a little bit. Welcome. Great that you both could join us tonight. And of course, congratulations, ELLE-MÁIJÁ, on this amazing and important film. Welcome. Now, before I hand it over to these guys, to those of you tuning in, I just would like to point out the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's where you can type in questions throughout the conversation. Shane will be watching for those questions, and he will try to get to as many as he possibly can. Also, a general Zoom note. We all know Zoom all too well now, but at the top of your screen, there's the view button if you want to adjust the way that you're watching this. That's it from me. Really looking forward to this conversation. Have a great time, and I will see you at the end.
Thank you.
Hello, ELLE-MÁIJÁ. How are you?
Hi, Shane. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. If I get restless, I'm just gonna hop on the exercise bike back there. Don't make it weird. It's not weird. It's totally normal. Just you and I here.
Not normal anymore.
Are you in Vancouver right now?
I am. I'm in my living room in Vancouver, East Van.
Very nice. I'm in Toronto, in my wife's office. So I guess I would love, I have so much I want to ask you about this beautiful, deeply engaging and important work. It's weird. I think because it's the Directors Guild talk, I definitely want to get into sort of, how you approached it as a director, but it's also kind of impossible not to acknowledge how emotional the work is, just to watch it. It's you've done something, it's very mesmerizing and very difficult at times to watch too, just to sort of see the way you've contextualized some of the ways that our people, and I even see my own family struggling, with generations of addictions. I even like the term in your write-up, not substance abuse, but substance use. Things like there's just such a new opening that your film brings to my consciousness and my idea about, how we have struggled and continue to struggle in that way. And so first, I guess I'm just trying to say, thank you for making this film. Thank you for having the courage to put yourself and your community on the screen in this way. I'm really, really honored and thrilled to have a chance to speak to you about this really, really beautiful documentary.
Thank you. Sorry, my 6-year-old niece or 7-year-old niece was calling me on Facebook Messenger. Got distracted, had to decline the call, which I never do.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah.
Facebook Messenger Kids, and so she has all these special filters, and usually when she calls, she's like a lion or a tiger or a unicorn or something. But thank you for everything you said, and it's an honor that you took the time and energy to moderate this conversation, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
So I'd love to start right at the beginning. What brought you to want to make this? I'm sure there's a community piece. Obviously, your mother features very prominently in the work, so there might be a connection there. And I'm curious, like, sort of when this idea percolated, when the importance percolated to then say, oh, I need to make a documentary feature film about this. If you could just give me a sense of how this came to be for you.
Yeah, sure. So my mom and my grandma and my auntie Anne are all watching right now, so I just want to say hi, mom, hi, grandma, hi, auntie. I guess the impetus for the film came from just hearing about everything my mom was witnessing as one of the few medical doctors on the reserve. She was on the front lines of the crisis, and I distinctly remember her calling me after reviving someone from an overdose back in 2014, I guess, and that was her first sort of experience with seeing someone experience drug poisoning from fentanyl. And so hearing about it and witnessing it and knowing how heavy that grief was that was permeating throughout the community, I felt, I guess, an urgency to do something with my, like, the only skills I have, which is film. I felt an obligation to document what was happening in the community. And there'd been so many news stories about Kainai that were often framed through the lens of tragedy and trauma, and there wasn't a heavy enough focus on all of the hard work that was happening. I knew about the work my mother was doing, but also just the whole community. There was a collective effort of just volunteers spending countless hours just meeting and strategizing and trying to figure out how to deal with this thing that was so new and urgent and scary. And now we're all familiar with the opioid crisis and fentanyl, but at the time it was like this brand new thing, and harm reduction, implementing naloxone kits, all of that was like very, very fresh. And so I felt an urgency to document what was happening, both just to counter the negative representations that I was seeing in the media, to fill that major gap in the story, which is that my community is strong and beautiful, and there are so many capable, talented, educated individuals within the community who are working really hard to find solutions. And we've now become, or Kainai's become, a national leader in terms of implementing harm reduction. It's not something that's like widely accepted within Indigenous communities. And I think the same can be said just more broadly. So I wanted to be able to document that, to document the fact that my community is now a national leader in the work that they're doing. And I felt an urgency to be able to film that. And I just feel like it's such an important story, and it would be such a shame to miss out on documenting this important moment.
I wonder if it might make sense, I'm just thinking that I've had the pleasure of seeing the documentary, and I'm sure some people in the room have as well, but maybe not everybody. And you just mentioned it too, that the idea of the harm reduction practice, as opposed to the abstinence-based, kind of programs like 12-step. I wonder maybe if we played the first clip with your mom, which explains the Gimabi Bitsin terminology, and then maybe we can sort of pick it up from there to sort of, if you could just describe, because that to me was a bit of an aha moment, and I'm curious how you came to understand, because it feels like the documentary is framed in that, like, hey, there's a new way of looking at this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good idea.
Our community has really been struggling with this whole word enabling. But we have a Blackfoot word that's called Gimabi Bitsin, which means giving kindness to each other. And I have so many mothers and grandmothers and relatives of users that come, and they're like, what do we do? Like, we've tried tough love. And a lot of times they feel really bad because they're using that Gimmatbibitsin or that motherliness where you just can't let your child go and you just can't cut those ties and let them fall. And so our community struggles with that. But I've just got this epiphany that we don't struggle with it anymore. We embrace it and say, this is our harm reduction, Gimmatbibitsin.
So yeah, just picking that up, could you explain sort of like, there's the fentanyl and this 2014, this sort of story that's happening and you want to recontextualize it, but it seems like the work is done so much to sort of lay out like there's a new way of looking at this, as your mom, Dr. TAILFEATHERS explains, the idea of, examining the idea that we can't just rely on old programs for a new problem.
Yeah, so I guess for people who are unfamiliar with what harm reduction is, there's the very sort of like commonly accepted golden standard for treating addiction, which is the abstinence model, which is like AA, NA, all those 12-step programs, the Red Road to Wellbriety, and those programs are rooted in the idea that people have to just quit using cold turkey, and that's the only way to recover from addiction or substance use disorder. But harm reduction is a different way of looking at it, and as my mom said in that clip, it's rooted in empathy and meeting drug users where they're at and understanding that expecting people to quit cold turkey is really unrealistic and in many cases inhumane. And in the case of the fentanyl crisis or the opioid crisis, abstinence models have been deadly. So harm reduction, saves lives. And so in terms of our community implementing it, when fentanyl hit the community, in a 6-month period, we almost lost 20 people to overdose, and that's a lot for a small community. And so the grief was very thick. Everybody in the community had lost a loved one or knew of a person close to them who passed away. And so the conventional methods of abstinence, sending people to abstinence-based treatment centers, it wasn't working because people were leaving the treatment centers and using the opioid at the dose that they were familiar with before, and then overdosing and passing away, and often using alone, which is really, really dangerous. And the choice to use alone, I think, is so often rooted in shame. And so Gimmatbibitsin, as my mom said, is a way for us as a community, I think, to embrace our Blackfoot teachings and our ways of relating to each other and the ways that we survive as a community. Gimmatbibitsin is a much healthier and humane and kind approach to addiction. And I think it's been a beacon of light in the last 7 years on this journey.
And when was it that so this reality is happening in your community, the way that your mother and others are approaching this in a new way, and let's try a new perspective, and one that's grounded in a community worldview and teaching. When did you sort of connect those dots, and what was that process of, oh, I want to make this as a feature documentary, and it'll be a participatory documentary in which I'll be the host, and I'm just curious, like, was it just I have a camera, I'm going to film some things because I just happened to be here, and then slowly it evolved into what it is, or was it no, here's the thing, I have a vision, I'm going to pitch it, now I'm going to go and make this film?
No, it definitely evolved into what it is, and there were many points along the way where I wasn't really even sure what I was necessarily doing. I was just kind of following my instincts. But it started out as a short film. I pitched the idea to the Hot Docs Cross Currents Fund, and so I was successful in that application, and that initial fund was meant for a short film. But I very quickly realized that it needed to be a feature. Like, there's just no way I could fit that entire story into a short doc. And so I approached the NFB about the potential of doing a feature with them. And as we all know, if you're working with the NFB, a co-production has to be like a majority co-pro. But they made a very rare exception and turned it into a minority co-pro, where I owned 3% of the film through my company. But eventually I applied to Telefilm's Indigenous stream and was able to make up the rest of that, those funds, and am now the majority co-producer on the film. But anyway, I spent a year researching and developing the film, and that research largely entailed just talking with members of my community, either people that my mother thought I should visit with and learn from, and generally in those conversations that led to so many other people. So I spoke with dozens of people within my community who had really beautiful insight and really generous teachings to offer. Because when I started this film, I knew like nothing about harm reduction. I knew the basics that I think most people know, like distributing clean needles to prevent the spread of disease, those kinds of things. But I knew so little about harm reduction. I assumed that like AA and 12-step programs were the way you go. And like, you know, when you watch film and TV, whenever someone has an addiction, it automatically cuts to that scene where they're sitting in a circle at an AA meeting. And so it's just been so like hardly ingrained into our idea that, you know, this is how you treat addiction, this is the way it works. And as a society, we've just accepted that. So when I started, I knew nothing really. And I felt like I needed to also just learn from people here in Vancouver. The downtown east side is kind of like the epicenter of the harm reduction movement in Canada, and there have been some major milestones in terms of access to harm reduction services that have taken place here in Vancouver. So I spent a lot of time just learning from harm reduction advocates in the downtown east side, and going to meetings with the Western Aboriginal Harm Reduction Society, and just being a fly on the wall and trying to learn as much as possible. And then also just trying to like contextualize how all of this fits into this legacy of settler colonialism that we've all inherited, and the ways that it's ongoing. And I read this really incredible book by Diane Million called Therapeutic Nations, which talks about how intergenerational trauma and everything that we've experienced has been historicized through like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the reconciliation movement within Canada. So it's like all of our trauma has just been like historicized into the residential school era, which allows for the Canadian government and the state to ignore the fact that there are so many ongoing inequities within this country that are directly related to state policy. And so that book talks about how to acknowledge that poverty is ongoing, and there are all these social determinants of health that are directly related to ongoing forms of settler colonialism. And so that book, along with a lot of other books and all of the conversations I had and all the time I just spent listening to people, really kind of like put me in the right place to be able to move forward with the doc. And then in terms of like figuring out how to tell the story, like I said, there were so many times along the way where I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I was just sort of following my instincts. And knowing that like my community is huge, and there's so many people from my community that have really important insight into this issue, and it just felt like I would be missed if I only focused on a few people. And so throughout the process of like, I think we filmed for almost 4 years, there were just so many people who we met like once, or people who we visited a couple of times, and they all had, you know, they were all an important piece of the puzzle. And I thought it was really important to be able to showcase the fact that there's like a diversity of voices within the community, and a diversity of opinions and lived experiences, and communities are complicated, and And I wanted audiences to understand that, and also to understand that, it's really hard to come up with a consensus on how to solve problems. But these are all the ways that it's happening within my community. So yeah, it was really complicated. And in terms of my decision to participate, I kind of felt like it was really important for me to also make myself vulnerable in front of the camera in the same way that all of the people who participated were, because it's such a generous thing to do, to offer your time and your story and trust. And some of them didn't know me before we started filming, and to just like trust that I was going to do justice to their story it's a big deal. And so I felt that it was really important for me as a community member and as a filmmaker to make myself vulnerable in the story. And I also think that with documentary, there's this commonly held idea that we should just that documentary filmmakers should somehow be objective, or like maintain that level of distance from our story and our participants. But as an Indigenous filmmaker, and I think this goes for so many of us, it's like you can't really do that when it's your own community and your own family, and it's impossible to remove yourself from the story in that way. So and then my family's been affected by this crisis, and I thought that was also important to put into context within the larger story.
How did you come to, maybe we can go through some of the key the character subjects. I mean, I don't know, it's the key people that you had from your community. In the documentary, I think about, so many of the people, the faces that you brought, like George and Leah, and Lori, and just you could just sort of explain like how it was that you created a space where they trusted you, and how you honored that trust in the room. But also, I'm curious too, in the sense of as a working director like yourself, how did you engage your crew to be honorable in those spaces? So that, because it's, you're doing so much verite, you know what I mean? Like, so you have imagining a boom person getting around, and then the camera person, shuffling to get the camera on an easy rig and the right framing. Like how did you create a working system, because you're on camera as opposed to behind and whispering and doing eye contact, like a third base coach to pull people back from the scene? Like, how did you create the working system that would enable that safe space? And how did you make that connection with each of those people, that those key characters like Lori and Leah and George?
Well, Lori, I was introduced to by my mom. She's, as you see in the film, she's a patient of my mother's, and my mom told her the project and that I was looking for participants, and so Lori and I spent a bit of time together, and I told her what my intention was with the film and wanted to learn more about her, and we had a really great conversation, and so she agreed to participate, and she was just so incredibly generous with her time and her story. And like I said, harm reduction is not something that's like widely accepted in our community still. Like even 7 years on, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still some I guess conservative attitudes towards harm reduction. And Lori has been on opioid agonist therapy, or Suboxone, for quite a few years, and that's a form of harm reduction. And so in her like willingness just to tell that story and share that part of her, I was just so grateful for that. And George and Leah, I found we were actually filming at a community event. We had been to the downtown east side. 10 women from my community came to the downtown east side to learn from all these different harm reduction organizations here. And we filmed all of that. And while we were filming, my mom said, Maya, is there some way that we can get access to this footage right away? Because I want to be able to share it with everybody back home. And so my producer at the NFB, David Christensen, was fully on board with that. And so what we did is we edited 7 short docs that were all about these different forms of harm reduction that we learned about in the downtown east side. And they weren't anything special or fancy. They were just like utilitarian tools for the community. And so my mom was doing a presentation in the community that we were also filming, and she was showing some of these short films to like a gym full of people at the Moses Lake Community Center. And George and Leah were there. And I ended up interviewing them because I was just curious, you know, what did they think about the videos that were shown, and especially the managed alcohol program. And I don't know, there was just something about them. They were just so open and honest and willing to share their story. And so that's how it started with them. They invited me down to their camp with our crew, and that kind of like started our relationship. And now I'm very close with them and very grateful for everything I've learned from them. And in terms of like how we actually did that with our crew, in Canada, there's a grave shortage of Indigenous technicians, you know, working in all of the key departments. You know this, there's a lot of really talented writers and directors, but there aren't enough people working in like sound and lighting and camera. And I wanted to be able to hire like a fully Indigenous crew, but it just wasn't possible in terms of the experience level necessary to, and also geographically people in that area. And so I had to hire some non-Indigenous key crew members. And I knew that in bringing them into my community, I had a responsibility to take care of my community and make sure that the outsiders that I was bringing in were aware of the reality of our community and the responsibility that we carry as storytellers, and the respect that's necessary to work with my community, because it's a privilege for them to be able to come in and do that work. And of course, we also hired people from home. I always hired people in my community to work on the film. And in an effort to build capacity, we also put in these like kind of trainee positions, but it was more than trainee positions because they did actually end up shooting a lot of the film. So we hired various emerging DPs, Indigenous DPs, to work with our crew. And so my main cinematographer, Patrick McLaughlin, worked closely with all of them on our many shoots, and in terms of training and understanding and building, I guess, the intuition necessary to shoot verite, because he had the experience. And it really is like an acquired skill. You have to work at it to understand like how to move with people and how to, you know, shoot cutaways and get all of the coverage that you need when you're shooting verite. And so anyway, bringing these settlers into the community in my crew, I knew that it was necessary to immerse them in some sort of like training off the top. So we did 3 days of kind of like a workshop. There's a 2-day workshop that was about kind of the history of settler colonialism in Canada and all of the policies that have affected our people, that a Blackfoot lawyer hosted. She hosted this 2-day workshop. We also did ceremony with a Blackfoot elder, and then they had a chance to sit down with another elder and just learn about Blackfoot ways of being and learn more about us as a people. And so that kind of set us off on the right foot and grounded us in a place of like respect and understanding for the work that we had to do. And also I think, you know, there's a long way to go still in Canada in terms of settler Indigenous relations. And I think a lot of settlers have so much unlearning to do. And there's just like a grave lack of knowledge when it comes to everything that we've experienced as Indigenous people and continue to experience. And so I think in working together because we have to, and that's not a bad thing, that there need to be opportunities for building relationships of understanding, and so yeah, that's how we went about it.
And what was it like to work with your mom, who features so prominently in your project? I know that she loves to be the center of attention, as you were saying earlier. If I got that, I don't know if my ear was right, but if you could just tell, I'm just curious, like, what was it? Because I think about, when I was watching you in the film, where you're setting up the table for your mom, or that you were at an event, and suddenly you're just part of the staff of your mom's presentation. It reminded me of my own experiencing with my dad, and was it did she always want to know what it is you needed, and oh, hey, I'll do that again, you're doing a wide shot? Is she a film type person, or like what was that whole process like? Because it's so beautiful the way your mother comes across, and it's so encouraging that we can come together and make it through a crisis with her presence in the film. And I just wondered, what was that like for you as a filmmaker, to be there doing that, and to, I guess, work with your mother in this way?
It was a really special experience. She's a very reluctant hero, I would say, and I think she would want people to know that she's not the only one doing this kind of work, that there's so many others. And that was kind of an agreement that we had off the top, was that if she participates, that I make it very clear that there are so many others in the community who are also doing really important work. And so that was something that was consistently in my head, in terms of how to tell this story, and how to make sure that audiences understand that it's like a full community effort, and that everybody has a connection to this story in some way. But yeah, she's she put up with a lot, because it's, documentary is an awkward thing, especially verite. You have to like just get used to having a crew there, but she was a good sport about it. But she's also just like so incredibly busy that we just had to find these like tiny windows of opportunity where she would let us like throw a mic on her, and then follow her into her exam room or something, and then as soon as she was finished, she'd be like, okay, and then she'd take off her mic, and the sound operator would be like, wait, no, like, stop, let me take that off. But yeah, she was wonderful to work with, and I'm just so incredibly proud of who she is and the work that she does, and just also her humility and generosity within the community, and the way that she embodies Gimapi Bitsin and everything that she does.
I wondered if we could go to another clip, this one of Roxy White Quills. In Ryan, just give that in a second, because I think it might, when we're constantly having to describe what it means, as you touched on earlier, to be someone from a community working in a community. And I think that almost like Roxy as somebody who works in the ambulance, and then you as a filmmaker, there's a correlation there. Maybe we could go with that clip, Ryan, and pick it up after.
Like history marks like the Bloods as some of the fiercest, strongest people there ever was, right? We held our women on a pedestal. We respected everybody. We helped each other out. And I want us to get to that point again. It truly breaks my heart, because a lot of the people I see, in Moses Lake walking around, hearing stand up, they were some of my closest friends in elementary school, right? They came to my birthday parties. I know I'm not gonna heal them, and I'm not gonna, make them better, because they're suffering in their own way. Like they that's why they've become addicted, because they've experienced that intergenerational trauma every day of their lives. And I'm not gonna heal them, but if I can at least give them a little bit of empathy and care when I'm with them, I think that's kind of my way of I don't know, like just doing the best I can, I guess.
Yeah, and so it's sort of, I think it's something that I know we're speaking as Indigenous filmmakers to each other, that frustration of trying to explain to somebody, no, we can't do that. We have to do this in the right way. I can't just fly in like a miner, grab the resource, get the gold and the camera, and then fly out again and then make the movie for you. Like, I have a responsibility as a community member to this community that goes before and after, over many generations before and after. So I can't just grab your gold and get out. You know, I have to sort of, you know, and I wondered what was it like for you to make this? I would be afraid to make a movie like this. You know, I would be like, this is a heavy burden. How do I get this right? How do I not let the community down? I just wondering what it was like for you to do this work.
Well, what was hard? It's I mean, addiction as a whole is such a complicated, often divisive conversation, especially when it comes to the conversations around abstinence and harm reduction within Indigenous communities. I think all of us have had a loved one or have a loved one who has lived with substance use disorder, and so it's like very close to home for a lot of people. But in terms of navigating all of that, I think the only way that I was able to kind of like move forward with strength was to know that I had an obligation to really do justice to my community and to be able to showcase all of these people. Every time I was home to film, I was just like so immensely proud of my community and just like so blown away by all of the people who are doing this work. And there's so many people who didn't end up in the film. Like, we filmed for 4 years, almost 4 years. And, you know, there's like over 150 hours of footage that we had to pare down into 2 hours, and just like dozens of people who didn't end up in the film, and many more who I would have liked to have filmed. So the only way, that I was able to kind of like move forward was to know that like I had an obligation to show the strength and beauty of my community, and to show the important work that was happening, and all of these sort of like quiet heroes that we don't know about. But also further to that, I felt a real necessity to be able to humanize the people who are living with substance use disorder, especially people like George and Leah. They live with alcohol addiction and are homeless or don't have houses, and they're often just sort of like cast aside as and treated as subhuman. Whereas, you know, when you meet them, you come to the understanding that they have stories and they still have hopes and dreams, and they're so kind and generous and strong. Like, everything that they have to experience on a daily basis, it just blows me away. I can't imagine ever being in that situation and finding the strength to get up every day and keep doing it. So I wanted to be able to give audiences the opportunity to get to know them on a really human level. And I wanted audiences to be able to understand that just because people use drugs or alcohol doesn't mean that they shouldn't be treated with dignity and respect. And that when it comes down to it, it's about, you know, human beings and their stories. And so as I worked, I tried to implement this idea of Gimmapi Bitsin into my work. And I was just modeling like what I was seeing within my community already, with all of these people who are working on the front lines, and the way that they treat each other and the people that they're helping, the way that they carry themselves with love and hope and dignity. I just felt like if I can channel like a little bit of that into my work, then I'll do this right. And so I guess that's how I did it. And I'm still like really anxious about showing it to Indigenous audiences. We're going to host an online screening for my own community. Everybody that's in the film has basically seen the film already and they're happy with it. But I'm really curious to see how Indigenous audiences respond, just because harm reduction is so contentious and addiction is a really painful thing for all of us in some capacity. And so those attitudes of shame and those conservative attitudes towards addiction are obviously rooted in painful experiences, and people legitimately have, good reasons to feel the way they feel about drugs or alcohol or addiction. And so it's a matter of just like being able to steer the conversation maybe in a different direction. And I feel like in being able to humanize stories like George and Leah's and Lori's story and Shay and Mariah, that maybe audiences, especially Indigenous audiences, will recognize people they know and love in those people's stories.
I mean, I think you did a great job with your editing team, sort of really allowing for the contextual basis as you're describing, like sort of a deep history that comes before contact. That there's this other place where people are really anchoring their spirit in their community from. And then, of course, the colonial impact and in the way you did with the animation and that process. I love that you included that part with, as you said, this balance of, okay, here's the issue. Here's somebody out there on the street, and they're frontline workers, and they're doing the best they can with the tools they have, and they're trying to make change. But then this sort of, here are the people. It's not just like it's not like the doctor show. Oh, here's the patient. How do we fix it? And then we follow them as they fall in love and go to a cafe. But it's like, who is this person who's here? In this room with them. I thought it was what I guess it's when I watch it. I heard this funny thing on this podcast about a therapist was describing people want to well, just fix it. Like just go in and, hey, you got this thing, just fix it. It's a broken bone. We're in, we're out, great, and then you can move on and live the best life, whatever it might be. And I think that your work in this one, it just had such a beautiful balance between orchestrating this history, these stories of these people, and allowing us, the viewer. There's just this one quote that's in your trailer, I think, too, but by no means is it celebrating addiction, but what it does is it celebrates the lives of people without judgment. And it just feels like that's like what you achieved the most, which was so hard hitting to the heart and the mind to sort of see this thing in a new human way, if you hadn't already been exposed to it in your family or community. So my question, so I was working myself up. Okay, I'm ready now. Onto the bike. My question though is, what was it like? So you filmed for 4 years. I'm assuming you and your editor, Hans Olsen, had a lot of stuff to work with. How did you compartmentalize and find the balance, work in the animation? What was the post process like for you?
Well, 3 months into our edit, COVID hit. So that really threw us for a loop. Like, we should have been finished at this time last year. But if anything, this pandemic gifted us with an extra chunk of time to be able to work on it. And I'm actually grateful, just thinking retrospectively, that that we had that extra time. But it was really hard. Like I said, there's so many people that didn't end up in the film, so many storylines that didn't end up in the film. It's just so hard to be able to put an entire community story into 2 hours. But Hans Olsen is such a talented editor. He's so thoughtful and sensitive in the way that he works. He edited both of Tasha Hubbard's last 2 docs, Birth of a Family and Nipa Wistamasuin or Nipa, what is it, Shane? Nipa
We will stand up.
Nipa Wistamasuin, We Will Stand Up. He edited both of those films. And so I spoke with Tasha and, asked what it was like to work with him. And she only had glowing things to say about Hans. And so, yeah, working with him was just like slowly chipping away at everything. Whenever I went home to film, I would come back and watch all of the dailies, watch all of the footage. I transcribed everything myself just for the sake of like knowing what every single minute of all of the footage we have looks like. So I had detailed transcribed notes of everything with time codes and all of that, so that when we went into the edit, I was able to just like look at my notes and be like, oh, November 29th, this person said this, let's watch that. So Hans and I spent a lot of time literally just watching all of the footage together, making selects of all the moments we thought were crucial, and then just slowly cutting and cutting and cutting. We worked in well, before COVID, we were working in an edit suite at the Edmonton NFB office, and it was just like there were Post-it notes everywhere. It was just this like kaleidoscope of like Post-it notes. But yeah, we tried to, I tried to find a way to sort of like make the character verite stuff speak with the like historical narrative stuff, talking about settler colonialism and all of the ways that factors into the story. And then also talking about these issues of like people's attitudes towards harm reduction versus abstinence. And it was really challenging to find to find a way to make all of those ideas speak with each other in like a cohesive way. And so on my very last shoot, I sat my mom down and did an audio interview with her, and that short, it was like a 30-minute interview. The audio clips from that interview kind of formed the connective tissue for all of that. So there's all of these segments throughout the film where we just hear my mom speaking, and she has this way of connecting all of the dots. And so, yeah, and then I was really opposed to narration. I mean, I think like everybody, I can't stand to hear the sound of my own voice. So like the edit was torture, because I had to like see myself and hear myself all the time. And so I had to like just dissociate and like, that's not me that I'm watching, it's just a person. But eventually, after many conversations with my producer, David Christensen, and with Hans, I realized that I needed to narrate. And seeing Tasha's film, We Will Stand Up, and the way that she managed to just like really gracefully narrate the story and be able to connect all of the dots, because I think there are a lot of parallels between our two films. They're about very different things, but also about the same thing. And they're both stories about being Indigenous on the prairies. So yeah, I was like, well, you know, I really appreciated Tasha's narration. It's not annoying in any way. I just need to get over this whole like, I don't want to hear my own voice thing. And so that's why we settled on all of the narration. There was just no other way to make it work other than to have my narration and then my mom's like audio segments connecting all of the dots. And Hans was so patient with me, because we tried so many different things. There were so many different versions of this film, and this is like what we finally settled on after a year of editing.
Wow. Yeah, that would be my fear about doing a participatory documentary, is that I would be like, I love the shots of me. Let's just run it all. It's my experience into this world. It's almost like a Zoom, a handheld phone film. So yeah, you made the right call. I think nice balance. There's going to be some questions, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to sort of check those out in a second. But before I take a peek at that, I haven't even looked at it yet. But I wondered what, I think about, there's things that you probably won't say in a Zoom. And then there's things that you can say. You decide obviously what that is. But I'm always struck by every project has an ability to sort of teach me something about myself as well. Or sometimes just revealing a lack. In my case, yours probably not. But the other part is that it also kind of, there's little things I pick up of, I can pay that forward, and I can use this teaching in a new way as a director. And so I'm wondering like what it was for you to make this film. Like what sort of new things did you sort of learn and grow, where you thought, I can actually move this forward in my practice and my artistry, because you've had such an amazing career. I'm just wondering what that is from this project.
Well, this project taught me so much just about what's possible in terms of just doing things differently. So I started working on this before The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open. So a lot of things that I tried out on this film in terms of the process, we implemented with The Body Remembers. And I guess, like, if anything, I just learned that you don't have to make a film in any certain way, that there's so many different ways to make a film. And that this film was all about just following my intuition and respecting my community teachings and cultural teachings, and listening to what my community wanted to see and hear. So in all of the people that I interviewed and met with, I asked them, you know, like, what do you think is missing from the public's understanding of our community? Like, what do you want the world to know about our community and who we are as a people? And so that was a really incredible process, was just like learning from my own community, who, you know, has nothing to do with film, in terms of like what's missing and how I can support filling in those gaps in the narrative, and how can I challenge all of these misconceptions about who we are as a people and a community.
Would you want to make another documentary in the same way, like the sort of the 4-year immersive process, or is this like you've had this experience and now you want, like, you know, very, 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 I want a quick scripted documentary?
Yeah, no, I loved working with my community. It was so much fun. It was so humbling to be able to witness the work of my people every day, and just to be home in this place that I love so much. So I want to be able to do it again, maybe not on something so heavy, because it does take a toll, having to tell stories about something that's heavy, but also be able to find these avenues of hope and light and love. But yeah, I would definitely do it again. I wanna make a doc series about my 13-year-old cousin's girls hockey team. They're the first girls hockey team from Kainai, and they're a real motley crew, and I loved watching them play, and I want to make a doc about them.
I've watched tons of Last Chance U on Netflix.
So
oh yeah, I total fan. I'm in. We have a couple questions, and I'll do my best to get through these. Okay. Maya, thank you for giving insight into this film. As you know, I am very familiar with the location and story. This is from Lorna Thomas. I also so look forward to seeing it. Knowing you will be screening the film for your community ahead of the premiere, how will you gather the response, I guess, in a pandemic time? So how are you going to screen the film to your community? And it is something I'm wondering about, like, you know, will you make sure that all the participants in the film are able to see the film in this community setting, and how will that go? How are you planning that?
Yeah, so in my process, it's absolutely critical that the participants have agency, especially editorial agency over how they're represented. And so a lot of, basically everyone, maybe a few people didn't get to see it, but for the most part, everybody got to see the film before it was finished. George and Leo were actually the first ones to see the film. And so I wanted to ensure that I wasn't getting it wrong, and that they were comfortable with everything that I was putting in the film, because it's like, it can be so harmful to tell somebody's story in the wrong way, and that can have a really lasting legacy on someone's life. And so it was really crucial for me to make sure those people saw it first. But in terms of how the community is going to see it, it's like, it's such a bummer, because I've like dreamed about being able to show this in person, you know, with my community, but that just can't happen with COVID. So we are working on a online free screening for my community through Eventive, which is like this platform where you can stream a film, and it's like password protected and all of that. And so that's, you know, it's a bummer to not be able to have that collective in-person experience, but it'll be what it is, I guess. And then hopefully we can do like a live Q&A type thing where people can ask questions, and I don't know. I hope once COVID is over, which doesn't even seem like realistic at this point, that we can do some in-person screenings.
It also seems like the kind of film that can do quite well as a resource in communities and other communities that are sort of grappling with that question of how do you do harm reduction as opposed to like stop it, fix yourself processing, you know. And it is, I'm sure working with the NFB, it has some of those advantages. And what is, how do you see that, you know, how do you see the rollout of something like this, the tools that you would like to see for this film to be used in Indigenous communities?
Yeah, so the film first and foremost was meant for my own community and then for other Indigenous communities experiencing similar issues. And so what we're doing is we are building an impact campaign. I don't know anything about impact producing or building an impact campaign, but it's something we're going to do. We've hired a Blackfoot filmmaker and producer to be our impact producer, and she's going to be mentored under some experienced impact producers and figure out how to build a campaign that gets this out to community in the most effective way, because ultimately it was made to be a tool for dialogue and education, and so we're figuring that out. And then of course the pandemic just makes it so much more complicated. Like we're supposed to somehow arrange a theatrical release, but I don't know how that's going to happen when nobody can go to theaters. Yeah, so we'll see. The impact campaign should be interesting. It should be a great way to like partner with community organizations and be able to host events where there are, you know, panel discussions and new ways of engaging with the material rather than just watching the film.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting, the idea of, you know, releasing things online in these days, you know, where everything's almost like a TV show. But I can say that, you know, when I was watching your film, you know, there was times when I would, you know, Claire would pass by, my daughter would pass by, and you know, sort of like, what's this? And she'd watch for a bit, and then we'd have to hit pause and have to sort of explain, you know, we'd talk through it, and she'd have questions or wonderings about things. And you know, there's this other bonus potentially, you know, that the film can be seen in a different way than the theatrically screened experience and still be impactful, because it is. Okay, so I have another question for you. When you went into, this is like director shop talk. Okay, so you're going into, they're doing the tour or they're making a presentation. What are you saying to your crew before? Do you say anything? Is it just like, okay, 1, 2, 3, go, break off and do your own thing? And how, I'm trying to understand how I guess is letting go is the issue. How do you not like handsy direct when you're out there in the space doing things? What was that process like compared to, like, you know, Red Girls Reasoning? I'm sorry, I'm going to talk kind of wrong. You know, like where it's so directed, it's like push in, pop, and like that. Your first short, which is so stunning. You know, it's like, yeah, there you go. You know, so what was this like by comparison to that kind of film? And then, of course, the other one, you're acting.
Yeah, there was a lot of communication with the crew, just like, all right, so this is what I'm hoping to get today, and these are the people that we're going to be filming. And I always gave my crew like a written brief of what we were going to be filming over the next week or two, and who we're going to be working with, and where they're at, and what I'm hoping to get from them. And before we went to any new location or whatever, we communicated like, this is what I'm hoping to get. And yeah, I'm just really grateful that I had such a respectful crew, and we had it was a tiny crew. It was just our DP Patrick, and there were so many different sound recordists, and then there was always a production assistant from my community, and then one of our trainees. So it was a very small crew. There was always room for conversation and questions and that kind of thing. But yeah, we just kind of like went with the flow. And then also I had to like just heavily schedule everything. Like most of the work was just planning and figuring out like the logistics of traveling around the biggest reserve in Canada and filming like over 50 people.
And so where, for those who are still here with us, I'm wondering what is, I know it's coming up on Hot Docs, and could you just let us know how people could see the film and engage with the film a bit more as we're getting ready for the release?
Yeah, so it'll premiere next week at Hot Docs, and then it'll premiere, have its Vancouver West Coast premiere at Doxa shortly after that. And then we'll see, I guess, other festivals. But yeah, tickets can just be purchased online at the box office for both those festivals.
And nfb.ca has a whole bunch of information about the film too, I'm assuming too. It's up there.
Yeah, they have a pretty in-depth press kit there, which has a lot of information.
Well, I want to talk more about the film, but Hans is signaling for me to. I think Hans, if you want to introduce you, Hans, you're tired of my voice, Hans. Just admit it. It's a rambling, mumbling mess of a voice. You're like, enough with that guy. We can only EQ the mid so much. That's it. Thank you, ELLE-MÁIJÁ. It was joyful.
Thank you both so much. That was fantastic. Really, really enjoyed that conversation. And no, Shane, not tired of your voice at all. Not at all. ELLE-MÁIJÁ, thank you so much for the film. Thank you for making it. And as Shane said, the courage that it took to make this film is truly remarkable. And I did have the privilege of seeing it prior to this and was very, very taken by it. So thank you. And everybody tuning in, please do make an effort to see this film. Hot Docs coming up, Doxa shortly thereafter, and down the road, no doubt, some version of theatrical and more online festivals. And to those of you tuning in, please join us on Friday night. We've got Steve J. Adams and Sean Horlor talking about their new film, Someone Like Me. That'll be moderated by Tiffany Shung, also at Hot Docs and Doxa. Invitations are going out as we speak, and you can watch all of our master classes and visionary sessions at the DGC National YouTube page. They're all there for you to watch. And soon, very soon, all of this will be on the very new DGC podcast, so stand by for that. ELLE-MÁIJÁ, Shane, thanks again for spending this time with us. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
much. Thanks, Shane.
See ya.
See ya.